It was a regular Friday evening, and I was nursing a whiskey at my favorite spot, a dimly lit bar downtown that had become a second home when things got rocky at work. I wasn't looking for anything or anyone, just enjoying the kind of silence that comes with a crowd of strangers, the kind that doesn't ask questions. But that's when I saw her. Madison, my wife. At first, I didn't believe it. What would she be doing here, of all places? She wasn't the type, but there she was, standing near the bar, her profile unmistakable. She was laughing at something, her hand brushing against the arm of a man I didn't recognize. A tall guy in a sleek suit, his posture screaming confidence. She leaned closer to him, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up as I tried to process what I was seeing. It wasn't just that she was here, or that she was with someone else. It was the way she looked at him, the same way she used to look at me when we first fell in love. My heart raced as I sank lower into my seat, praying she wouldn't notice me. She looked happy, carefree, like someone I hadn't seen in a long time. And that's when it hit me. She didn't recognize me. Not because I wasn't there in the same room, but because the person she was now, with him, was a stranger to me too. I kept my distance, watching as the night unfolded, each moment unraveling a piece of the life I thought I knew. I couldn't bring myself to leave. I told myself it was curiosity, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was the need to understand how everything had come to this. Madison, my wife of 10 years, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was laughing and leaning into this stranger like a love-struck teenager. I stayed in the shadows, watching as they moved to a table in the corner. She rested her hand lightly on his forearm as they spoke. I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing second. Their body language was unmistakable, easy, intimate, as if they'd known each other forever. They ordered drinks, and he made her laugh again. It was that laugh, the one that used to be mine. She used to look at me that way, her eyes sparkling like I was the only person in the world. But now, that light was shining for someone else. My grip on my glass tightened as I forced myself to stay rooted in my seat. Bursting in there, demanding answers, wouldn't solve anything. I needed to think, to stay one step ahead. So instead of confronting her, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of them. My hand shook as I did it, but I knew I'd need it later, not just as proof, but as a reminder that this moment was real, that this wasn't some nightmare I'd wake up from. I watched them for what felt like an eternity. The way she leaned toward him, the way he touched her hand as if it was second nature. They didn't notice me, or anyone else for that matter. They were in their own little world, and that realization cut deeper than I expected. When they finally got up to leave, I felt a jolt of panic. I couldn't just let them walk out, not without knowing where they were going. So I followed them, keeping my distance as they stepped out onto the dimly lit street. The man gestured toward his car, a sleek black sedan parked nearby. Madison nodded, smiling as she slipped her arm through his. My heart sank as they got into the car together and drove off. I stood there on the sidewalk, watching their taillights disappear into the night. Part of me wanted to jump in my car and follow them, but the other part, the rational part, knew I needed a plan. A confrontation wouldn't fix this. It wouldn't undo whatever had already happened. I turned and walked back to my car, the weight of what I'd just seen pressing down on me like a boulder. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying every detail of the night. Her laughter, his touch, the way she didn't even hesitate to leave with him. By the time I got home, the house felt cold and foreign, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot where she usually slept. It was empty tonight, and the silence was deafening. I didn't sleep at all. How could I? My mind was racing with questions, doubts, and fears. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And the most painful question of all, was I to blame? But one thing was clear. I couldn't ignore this. Madison wasn't just slipping away. She was already gone, and I needed to figure out what to do next. The morning after was like waking up in someone else's life. The bed was empty, cold, a reminder of the previous night's revelations. Madison hadn't come home. I wasn't sure if I should feel relieved or heartbroken. Either way, her absence only confirmed what I already knew. Things would never be the same. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without answers. Not without proof. I needed to know who this man was and how deep their connection went. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I became a detective in my own marriage. I started with her phone. Madison had always been protective of it, but she'd made the mistake of leaving it unlocked once before. I'd remembered her passcode, a trivial detail at the time, but now it felt like the key to Pandora's box. She'd left the phone charging on the kitchen counter, so while she was out running errands, I seized the moment. My hands trembled as I navigated through her messages. Most of them were mundane, conversations with friends, reminders about appointments, group chats about our kids' school. But then I found a name that made my stomach drop, Aaron. Their message thread wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. The few texts were intimate, carefully chosen words that left no room for misinterpretation. Aaron, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Madison, me too. I hate how little time we get together. Aaron, soon. Maddie, just be patient. Maddie. He called her Maddie, the nickname I'd used for her since college, the one that felt like ours, now tainted by him. The texts painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a fling. This was something deeper, something that had been building while I was obliviously going through the motions of our life together. I searched further, digging into her emails. There were confirmations for hotel reservations, receipts for expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, and even a spa day she billed as a gift to herself. It all pointed to a double life she'd been living, and I was the fool who'd been none the wiser. The anger was almost suffocating, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't confront her yet, not without knowing the full extent of her betrayal. I needed a plan, a way to face this without losing my mind in the process. That evening, Madison came home just as I finished going through her phone. She looked tired, her smile forced as she greeted me. Long day, she said, setting her bag down. What about you? Yeah, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Busy as always. She moved through the house like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't spent her day wrapped up in another man's life. It made my skin crawl, watching her so at ease when I was barely holding myself together. But I played along, pretending everything was normal while the evidence sat like a weight in my pocket. Later that night, after Madison had gone to bed, I made a decision. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. And that's when I decided to follow her again. The next day, I installed a GPS tracker on her car. It felt invasive, wrong. But at this point, my moral compass was as shattered as my trust in her. If she was lying to me, I needed to know where she went, who she was with, and how far this went. The tracker's results came in almost immediately. Over the next few days, I watched as Madison's movements confirmed my worst fears. She wasn't just seeing Aaron occasionally. She was spending entire afternoons with him, meeting at that same boutique hotel. The timestamps, the locations, the patterns, it was all there, laid out like a roadmap of betrayal. I felt like a stranger in my own life, caught in a spiral of anger and heartbreak that I couldn't escape. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had a plan. Not until I knew what I wanted to say and what I wanted to do next. I knew the confrontation was inevitable, but I wasn't going to stumble into it. This had to be on my terms, with every piece of the puzzle laid out in front of us. I needed Madison to know there was no escaping the truth. The next Saturday, Madison told me she was meeting a friend for coffee. She kissed me on the cheek, smiled, and walked out the door like it was just another normal day. But I knew better. I tracked her last coffee date to that same boutique hotel. This time, I followed her again. I stayed a safe distance, heart pounding as I watched her car weave through traffic. She didn't even flinch as she took the same route, pulling into the same hotel parking lot. When she got out, she was wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years. Red, form-fitting. Something she used to wear on special occasions. My stomach turned as I watched her meet Aaron in the parking lot, his hand casually slipping to the small of her back as they walked inside. I sat there for nearly an hour, every second dragging on like an eternity. I couldn't decide if I should go in and confront them or wait for her at home. My emotions warred with logic until I finally made a decision. I would confront her that night. Not at the hotel, not in a public scene. No, she needed to face this in the place she desecrated, our home. She came back that evening, her face calm, her demeanor unbothered. She breezed through the door, dropped her bag on the counter, and gave me a quick smile. "Hey," she said. "How was your day?" I'd set the stage in the dining room. On the table were all the pieces of evidence I'd collected, printouts of GPS logs, screenshots of her texts, photos of her and Aaron at the cafe and hotel. It was all there, undeniable and inescapable. When she saw the table, her smile faltered. Her eyes darted to mine, then back to the table. What's all this?" she asked, her voice shaky. I stood across from her, arms crossed, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "It's everything, Madison," I said evenly. "Everything you've been hiding from me." She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried, her voice weak and unconvincing. "Don't," I interrupted sharply, slamming my hand on the table. "Don't insult me with more lies. I've followed you, Madison. I've seen you with him. I know about Aaron, about the hotel, about all of it." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it again. But then her shoulders slumped, and the mask she'd been wearing cracked. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for me to find out? That's your excuse? What about what you've done, Madison? What about the lies, the betrayal?" Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped closer, reaching out for me. "Michael, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let me explain." I stepped back, shaking my head. "Explain? What could you possibly say to justify this? You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, lying to my face every single day. Do you even know what you've done to me? To us?" She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she sank into a chair. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed. "I didn't know how to tell you that I was unhappy, that I felt lost." "Lost?" I spat, my voice rising. "So you found yourself in another man's arms? That's your solution?" She looked up at me, her face a mask of guilt and regret. "I don't have an excuse," she admitted. "I messed up. I let things go too far. But I never stopped loving you, Michael. Please believe me." I stared at her, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, sadness, betrayal. "You say you love me," I said quietly, "but love isn't what you've shown me. Love doesn't look like lies and deceit." Her tears fell harder as she nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. "You're right," she said. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'll do anything, to fix this." I stayed silent for a long moment, letting her words hang in the air. Then I leaned forward, my voice steady but firm. "Fixing this isn't just about what you want, Madison. It's about what I need. And right now I need space." She nodded, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled over. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll stay with my sister. Whatever you need, Michael." She left that night, her bag hastily packed, her sobs echoing faintly through the house. And as I sat alone in the quiet, the weight of her betrayal pressed down on me like a lead blanket. The house was eerily quiet after Madison left. Her absence was palpable, a void that seemed to echo through every room. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, trying to process everything that had just happened. The weight of her confession, her tears, and her desperate pleas lingered in the air. But the one thing that kept replaying in my mind was her choice. She had chosen him, time and time again, and I was left to pick up the shattered pieces of our life. The days that followed were a blur. Madison texted me a few times, asking how I was, telling me she loved me and was thinking of me. I left her messages unread. I needed space, and more importantly, I needed clarity. I spent my days going through the motions, work, errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But the nights were the hardest. The bed felt colder, emptier, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, touching, living a life I wasn't part of. Eventually, I knew I couldn't live in limbo forever. I had to decide what came next. One evening, about a week after she'd left, Madison called. I hesitated, staring at the screen, before finally answering. "Michael," she said softly, her voice fragile. "Can we talk? Please." I agreed, and the next day, she came back to the house. She looked different, tired, anxious, her usual confidence replaced by something tentative. She sat on the couch across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice trembling, "and I know I can't undo what I've done. I've broken your trust, and I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, to fix us." Her words were heartfelt, but they didn't land the way they once might have. Too much had been broken. I leaned back, crossing my arms as I studied her. "Why now, Madison? Why does it take losing everything for you to realize what you want?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I held my ground. "I was selfish," she admitted. "I let my own insecurities and unhappiness cloud everything. I didn't know how to talk to you, so I ran away from what we had, from what we built." "You didn't just run away," I said, my voice cold. "You betrayed me, Madison. You chose someone else over me, over our family." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But Michael, I love you. I always have, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love could fix this, that time could heal the wounds she had inflicted. But deep down, I knew the truth. "Madison," I said quietly, "love isn't enough. Not after what you've done. Trust is the foundation of everything, and you've destroyed it." She broke down then, her sobs racking her body as she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry." I stayed silent, letting her cry, letting the weight of her actions sink in. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, I took a deep breath. "I need to move on," I said, my voice steady. "For my sake. For our kids' sake. I can't rebuild a life on a foundation that's already crumbled." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She nodded slowly, her tears falling silently now. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll respect your decision." The divorce was finalized a few months later. Madison moved to a new city, seeking a fresh start, while I stayed behind to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, but with time, the pain began to fade. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into work, and started therapy to process everything I'd been through. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. One evening, as I sat by the lake near our old favorite spot, Watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. Madison had been a chapter in my life, a chapter filled with love, heartbreak, and lessons I would carry with me forever. But it was just that, a chapter, not the whole story. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and gold. And as the darkness settled in, I realized something profound. I had survived. And more than that, I was ready to turn the page.